On April 21, 2025, the Vatican was enveloped in an eerie stillness. St. Peter's Square, once alive with prayers and hymns, now echoed only with the faint whistle of wind through ancient columns. A brief announcement from the Holy See stunned the world. Pope Francis, the man who walked among the poor, who knelt to wash the feet of society's outcasts, had passed away. He died at 88 in the simple room at Casa Santa Marta, where he chose to live instead of the Apostolic Palace. But what kept millions glued to the Vatican wasn't just the loss of a pope. It was what followed. Less than 2 weeks later, on May 8th, white smoke rose from the Sistine Chapel's chimney. A new pope had been elected, the first American in history. Cardinal Robert Francis Prevost, now bearing the title Leo XIV. This event wasn't just a historical milestone, it was a seismic shift for those familiar with an ancient document, hidden in the Vatican's secret archives, the Prophecy of St. Malachy. This text, attributed to a 12th century Irish saint, lists 112 popes, from Celestine II to a final figure, Peter the Roman. According to the prophecy, after this pope, the city on 7 hills, Rome, will be destroyed, and the day of judgment will come. What sent hearts racing was that Pope Francis, by the reckoning of scholars, was the 112th pope in the sequence. So why, after his death, did a new pope, Leo XIV, emerge? Was the prophecy wrong, or is there a deeper mystery waiting to be unraveled? Today we embark on a journey to explore not only the death of a man who transformed the Church, but also the prophecies from 900 years ago and what they mean for the new pope, standing before a world in turmoil. Let's start with Saint Malachy, a figure not just a saint, but a mystic. Born in 1094 in Armagh, Ireland, Malachy was a bishop driven by zeal to reform the Church. In 1139, while visiting Rome to meet Pope Innocent II, he is said to have received a strange vision. In this vision, Malachy saw a long procession of popes, from his time to the end of days. He recorded this revelation in 112 short Latin phrases, each describing a pope through symbolic imagery, a coat of arms, a homeland, or a fate. According to legend, this document was given to Pope Innocent II and forgotten in the Vatican archives until rediscovered in 1595 by a Benedictine monk, Arnold Wyon. But here's where the story gets complicated. Many scholars, including Catholic historians, argue that the prophecy of St. Malachy may be a 16th century forgery, crafted for political purposes, perhaps to support a papal candidate in the 1590 conclave. Why? The phrases describing popes before 1590 are strikingly accurate, almost biographical summaries, but after 1590 they become vague, easily applied to anyone with creative interpretation. For instance, the phrase for Pope Leo III, lumen in caelo, light in the sky, is linked to a comet on his coat of arms. Yet for Pope Clement XIV, Ursus velox, to swift bear, has no clear connection to his cautious, hesitant nature. So why did the prophecy of St. Malachy capture global attention when Pope Francis died? Because the final phrase, the 112th, isn't just a brief description. It's a chilling warning. In the final persecution of the Holy Roman Church, Peter the Roman will sit, shepherding his flock through numerous tribulations. When these things have come to pass, the city on 7 hills will be destroyed, and the dreadful judge will judge his people. The end. Francis, with his Italian roots and a name echoing St. Francis of Assisi, whose birth name was Giovanni di Pietro, was believed by many to be Peter the Roman. But if he was the final pope, what does the emergence of Leo XIV signify? Is he part of the prophecy, or a sign of something entirely different? The death of Francis wasn't just the end of a papacy. It was a moment that made the world pause, questioning what lies ahead. As his simple wooden coffin was placed in St. Peter's Square, guarded by thousands of security personnel, people weren't just bidding farewell to a man. They were witnessing a historical turning point, one that, according to ancient prophecy, might lead us to the final days. When Pope Francis passed away, the world didn't just lose a religious leader. It lost an icon of humility, a man who refused to live in a palace for a modest room, who wore worn black shoes instead of the traditional red papal slippers. But to understand why his death reignited debates about the prophecy of St. Malachy, we must look back at his journey and how it eerily mirrored the words of a 900-year-old prophecy. Jorge Mario Bergoglio, born to Italian immigrants in Buenos Aires, never intended to become pope. As a young man, he faced death. A severe lung infection forced doctors to remove part of his lung. In those bedridden days, he prayed, not for healing, but for meaning in his suffering. That moment shaped him, a priest, a cardinal, and ultimately Pope Francis, a man who championed mercy and closeness to the forgotten. Elected pope in 2013, he chose the name Francis, inspired by Saint Francis of Assisi, the saint of the poor. But few know that Saint Francis's birth name was Giovanni di Pietro, son of Peter. With his Italian heritage and a name tied to Peter, Francis seemed to fit the prophecies Peter the Roman in an uncanny way. Moreover, his papacy was exactly as the prophecy foretold, marked by tribulations, from the clergy abuse scandals to divisions between conservative and progressive factions, to global crises like COVID-19 and the war in Ukraine. Francis led the Church through relentless storms. One of the most unforgettable moments of his papacy was on March 27, 2020, when he stood alone under the rain in St. Peter's Square, praying before the Eucharist as the world reeled from the pandemic. That solitary, powerful image seemed to embody the prophecy, a shepherd guiding his flock through suffering. But when he died, the biggest question wasn't what he had done, but what would happen next. If Francis was truly Peter the Roman, why did the Church elect a new pope? On May 8, 2025, Cardinal Robert Francis Prevost, an American of Peruvian descent, was elected Pope Leo XIV. This event sparked heated discussions. Some argued that the prophecy of St. Malachy doesn't say there would be no popes after Peter the Roman, only that his era would mark the end of an age. Others questioned, could Leo XIV be a figure unmentioned by the prophecy or part of a new interpretation? Let's look at Leo XIV himself. Born in Chicago, raised in a Catholic family, Robert Prevost spent much of his career as a missionary in Peru, serving impoverished communities. When elected pope, he chose the name Leo, evoking Pope Leo XIII, known for his social teachings on justice and labor. In his first homily, Leo XIV called for the Church to build bridges through dialogue and expressed deep respect for his predecessor, Francis. Notably, his birth name, Robert Francis Prevost, carries Francis, a symbolic continuation of his predecessor. However, the prophecy of St. Malachy mentions no Leo or any phrase clearly tied to Leo XIV. This leads some to wonder, does his emergence suggest the prophecy was misread? Or, as some scholars propose, is the prophecy not a precise map of the future, but a symbolic warning of the trials the Church will face? In today's world, with geopolitical conflicts, climate crises, and polarization within the Church, Leo XIV's papacy may be no less turbulent than his predecessors. As Francis's simple wooden coffin was placed in St. Peter's Basilica, surrounded by hundreds of candles and prayers, the world wasn't just saying goodbye to a man. It stood at a crossroads where ancient prophecies seemed to come alive. Yet the question lingers. Where will Leo XIV lead the Church? And is he the last to sit on St. Peter's throne? When white smoke rose from the Sistine Chapel, signaling the birth of Pope Leo XIV, the world seemed to exhale in relief. After the somber days of Francis's funeral, the Church had found a new shepherd. But in the hearts of many, from devout believers to prophecy scholars, an unease lingered. If the prophecy of St. Malachy is true, and Francis was indeed Peter the Roman, what does Leo XIV's papacy mean? Is he a sign of hope, or the start of a new uncertain chapter? Let's revisit Francis's death. In his final days, he battled persistent health issues, remnants of the lung surgery from his youth. Yet even as his body weakened, his spirit remained unbroken. He continued to call for peace, environmental stewardship, and reforms to make the Church closer to the marginalized. When he passed, millions worldwide took to the streets, from Buenos Aires to Manila, to honor him. In St. Peter's Square, thousands stood under the rain, holding candles and praying, as if bidding farewell not just to a pope, but to an era. The prophecy of St. Malachy, with its warning of Rome's destruction and the day of judgment, left many wondering if we are living in the final days. But there's another perspective to consider. Catholic theologians like Father James Weiss of Boston College argue that the prophecy may not be a literal prediction, but an invitation to reflect. The city on 7 hills, they suggest, may not face physical destruction, but symbolize a spiritual collapse, a crisis of faith, or a profound transformation in how the Church exists. Against this backdrop, the emergence of Pope Leo XIV carries special weight. As the first American on St. Peter's throne, he represents an increasingly global Church. His papacy begins in a world rife with challenges, conflicts in the Middle East, tensions among superpowers, and a Church still grappling with past wounds. In his first homily, Leo XIV spoke of confronting the loss of faith and building a church of communion. His words, though gentle, carried a gravity, as if he understood he was stepping into an unprecedented era. But could Leo XIV be part of the Malachy prophecy? Some have tried to link him to Peter the Roman by noting that every pope is a successor of St. Peter, and Roman could broadly mean the spiritual center of the Church. Yet his birth name, Robert Francis Prevost, has no direct tie to Peter, and his American-Peruvian background doesn't evoke Rome. This leads many to believe that if the prophecy is real, it may have ended with Francis, and Leo XIV marks the start of an uncharted chapter. Still, the images created by Francis's death and Leo XIV's rise are undeniable in their power. As Francis's plain wooden coffin was carried through St. Peter's Square, protected by an unprecedented security apparatus, it was more than a symbol of departure. It was a reminder that even in the most sacred moments, the world is fraught with threats. And when Leo XIV stepped onto the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica with a faint smile and pensive gaze, he seemed to carry a message. That faith, no matter the challenges, will find its way. Ultimately, the prophecy of St. Malachy, whether true or not, isn't the final answer. It's a call to look deeper into ourselves, our faith, and the world we live in. Francis left a legacy of mercy, of courage in the face of adversity. Leo XIV, with his first steps, is continuing that path, but in his own way. Perhaps the real question isn't whether the prophecy is correct, but what we will do with the time we have left. If this story has moved you to reflect, share it with others. And let's ask together, are we witnessing the end of an era or the beginning of something greater? The answer, perhaps, lies within each of our hearts.